The administration of U.S. President Donald Trump has added 4 more Chinese companies to a blacklist of alleged Chinese military-controlled companies. The U.S. Department of Defense listed China's top chip maker, SMIC, oil giant, SNOOC, construction technology company, and international engineering consulting corporation. That brings the total number of companies blacklisted to 35. A new executive order by Trump, which will come into effect next year, prohibits U.S. investors from trading with the blacklisted firms. The listing is sure to cause more tensions, as Washington and Beijing are already at loggerheads over a range of trade and foreign policy issues. Previously, China threatened to produce its own blacklist of U.S. companies. Jason Unruhe is a political commentator and joins us now out of Ontario. Jason, it's good to see you. Is this a policy of the Trump White House, or do you see it as part of a broader effort by the U.S. against China?
Well, I think this is definitely a part of a larger effort against China. Essentially, what we're seeing is China is expanding many of its spheres of influence outside not just Asia, but now into Africa and the Middle East as well. And as they economically develop, they're spreading out, creating trade with new partners, loaning money to developing nations, etc. And this stands as a threat to the United States as the primary imperialist power in the world right now. This undermines their ability to scoop up capital from other countries. It undermines their expansion that they have been carrying out since at least the end of the First and the Second World War. And that's what the U.S. sees. They see a competitor to their own empire. Now, traditionally in the past, when empires have come up against each other, they went into a world war. However, following the end of the Second World War with the advent of nuclear weapons, this completely changes everything. And most of the world deals with the mutually assured destruction principle. So the United States has to find another way of undermining China. Obviously, militarily taking on China is a near impossible task. It would not be possible. The foot soldiers alone to occupy China just simply do not exist. It just can't happen. So one of the other ways they can do so is to take what power the U.S. still has economically, not just as the primary imperialist power in the world, but the majority shareholder in things like the World Bank, and use that ability, particularly their ability to sanction companies in order to hurt the Chinese economy. They're sending a direct message to China: stop with your, expanding your economy beyond your own borders, stop trade with other countries, etc. And this is the best way that the United States has to do this at the time, because a military option would be simply nonsense. So undermining that Chinese growth, or at least in a way inhibiting it from spreading further into the United States, is something that they definitely want to do to make more room for domestic production and undermine China overseas. And hopefully the U.S. companies can try to get into the same places the Chinese companies are trying to get into. And that's their larger economic and political economic strategy.
And Jason, how do you see Beijing potentially responding to these latest measures, the blacklisting of companies?
Well, traditionally, China has dealt with this blacklisting by some kind of retaliatory effort in return. However, they tend not to have the strength that the U.S. sanctions and blacklistings tend to have, because, of course, the U.S. has much more of its capital internationally and has more power to do that in general. However, it's definitely going to be a case where China is not going to back down. I mean, it's been pretty much proven over the past decade or so that U.S. efforts to undermine the Chinese economy, to undermine Chinese influence across the world, has been not very successful at all. So I think China is going to retaliate by possibly blacklisting some U.S. companies, or maybe could respond by putting tariffs on certain U.S. goods. I mean, we saw an exchange of tariffs only a few years ago in the dispute between China and the United States, particularly with U.S.'s America First policy, etc. But there are definitely some options on the table that China can use in this situation. The only real question in my mind is exactly how strong is China going to retaliate?
Right, yeah, indeed. And as Biden assumingly takes office, where do you see bilateral relations heading?
See relations between China and the United States getting a bit better. I mean, it's hard to define exactly, what is meant by better. I would say more peaceful, yet still remain in serious competition. I think Biden has a much more level head when it comes to dealing with these kinds of things, a much more strategic approach to trying to undermine what is a growing China, whereas Trump generally has more of a bull in a china shop kind of approach. We're just lashing out with something because it was the first thing off the top of his head. As we have seen from this current administration in the U.S., there is no solid foreign policy plan. They only have a general idea of what it is they want to do, but not a roadmap or a definite plan in order to carry that out. What we would see is something probably more pernicious from Joe Biden, but something definitely less hostile in terms of giving China a reason to strike back at the U.S. It's always been a very difficult geopolitical game when dealing with these kinds of economic situations. And Trump has not been much of a player himself, but Biden, with all his experience under the Obama White House, would certainly give him an edge in creating something that would be much more sophisticated.
Right. Jason, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts there. Jason Unruhe, political commentator, joining us out of Ontario.